I don't know. I think people need to look at themselves in the mirror and realize, like, man,
Yikes.
you got some insecurities if you sitting down and putting
Yikes.
Caitlin Clark as the 11th best guard. Like,
She's not wrong. She's not wrong. Where it's like, if Kate, like, you can underrate Caitlin in a way where it's like, this is not hilariously bad.
That is a Hall of Famer on her own podcast telling grown WNBA players to go book a therapy appointment over a vote. Not a trade, not a playoff loss, a vote for who starts an exhibition game. That one number she keeps repeating is the whole story. So how does a guard putting up a career year, second in the entire league in assists, come out ranked the 11th best guard in her own sport?
Kelsey Plum, it's the same with Jackie Young being ranked at 14. But like, you could, if Caitlin came out as 7th, or let's just say 5th, for argument's sake, 5th. Because for me, there's no argument. There's no, like, you can make an argument. I don't agree with it. That Olivia Miles based on this season's won. Cool.
So let's actually put the numbers on the table, because this is where it gets ridiculous. This season, Caitlin Clark is averaging 21.2 points a game, and that is 4th in the entire league. She is handing out 8.2 assists a night, which is 2nd in the WNBA behind only Alyssa Thomas. She is shooting a career-best 43% from the field. Fans looked at that and voted her the 2nd best guard in the league. The media looked at it and voted her 3rd. Those are the two groups that get paid to watch basketball, and they landed in roughly the same place. Then the players turned in their ballots and dropped her to 11th, not 7th, where you could at least squint and argue it, 11th. And when the host says there is no real argument for having her 5th, he is not exaggerating. The box score simply does not support anything close to 11.
And that's it. If you have Caitlin lower than 4, you're in some absolute hater territory. You're in some absolute hater territory there.
Here is how the All-Star starter vote is actually built, because the mechanics matter. Fan votes count for 50% of the final tally. The media vote and the player vote each count for 25%. So when Clark finishes 2nd with the fans and 3rd with the media, that carries most of the weight, which is exactly why she still ended up a starter for the 3rd year running, alongside her Indiana teammates Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell. But that player slice is the tell. Last year, those same players ranked her 9th. This year, they somehow moved her down to 11th, in a season where her numbers went up, not down. You do not slide a player backward while her production climbs unless something other than production is doing the voting. And I want to flag one thing now, because we are coming back to it. The flaw in this vote is not really the math, and it is not even that players are allowed to vote for their own teammates. The part that should actually bother you is why this keeps happening to this one specific player. Hold that thought.
Overrated, if you get me. Like I remember in 2024 when I predicted my USA 2028 Olympics team, I had Ryan Howard in the team. People were like, "Oh no, she's not going to make it." And then people were like asking me what my pro comparison to Juju Watkins is. I said that she's a better slashing Ryan Howard. And everyone was like being like, "Oh, we've never seen any."
And this is the moment the whole thing falls apart, because you can see exactly who the players lifted up instead. According to the released breakdown, the players ranked Ryan Howard of the Atlanta Dream as the 2nd best guard in the league. 2nd, Howard is a talented player, but she is listed as a guard while she basically plays the 3. Her Dreams sit around 4th in the standings, and on the combined weighted score, she was actually the first guard left out of the starting lineup. So the players had Howard at 2 and Clark at 11, in a season where Clark is ahead of her in scoring and assists. That gap is not a basketball opinion. That is a fingerprint. The host makes a sharper point buried in there too, that Howard spent so long being underrated that the correction overshot, and now she gets called a top 5 player in a league where, in his view, she is not. He even reaches for a college comparison, saying the hype around USC's Juju Watkins reminds him of an early Ryan Howard, just a better slashing version. You can agree or disagree with his scouting, that is opinion. But the vote itself is not opinion. When a room full of professionals looks at the same season the fans and the media just watched, and ranks the 2nd leading assist woman in the sport below 9 other guards while pushing a non-starter up to 2nd, they are not grading basketball anymore. They are grading something else, and everybody watching can feel it.
If you had her anywhere below 4, and like even below Kelsey Mitchell, like Caitlin and Kelsey are at the time the voting ended were both, I think they were identical on points. I think there might maybe 0.1 point difference. And there's literally nothing other than scoring the basketball more efficiently that Kelsey Mitchell does better than Caitlin Clark on the floor. Like, there's not. And if you want to say defense, watch what the Mercury did to Kelsey Mitchell. They didn't target Caitlin, they targeted Kelsey Mitchell. And they put up 111 points, the most points Fever conceded this year.
Now watch how close to home this actually lands, because it is not just rival players doing the downgrading. The players ranked Kelsey Mitchell 7th among guards. Mitchell plays for the Indiana Fever. She shares a backcourt with Caitlin Clark, so Clark's own teammate got slotted 4 spots ahead of her by the league's players, and so did Aaliyah Boston up front. Now Mitchell is having a genuinely strong season, and the host is fair about that. He points out that when the Phoenix Mercury built their game plan around taking Mitchell away, she still went off, and that on pure scoring efficiency, she has a real case. That is a fair thing to say about Kelsey Mitchell. It is also a little surreal to picture the same locker room, the same 3 starters flying to Chicago together, and know that the rest of the league looked at that trio and decided the one drawing the sellout crowds and the record television numbers was the least impressive guard of the bunch. This is the part people gloss over. The disrespect is not coming from some distant corner of the league. It is baked into a system where the woman carrying the sport's popularity gets ranked underneath teammates she takes the floor with every single night. When your own building produces 2 players the league rates above you, and your box score says the opposite, you are not looking at a basketball disagreement. You are looking at a message.
Y'all need to go to a therapist and figure out what childhood issues you have. Because if you're sitting there and looking at yourself in the mirror and putting her as 11th best guard, and you're putting you as 8th best, like, come on. And Kelsey Plum is the 12th. Now, maybe games, because she's been hurt. This is crazy. Okay.
And Clark is not even the only guard who got buried, which tells you this is a pattern and not a one-off grudge. The players ranked Kelsey Plum 12th. Plum is 2nd in the entire league in scoring at nearly 24 points a game, sitting behind only Arja Wilson, 12th. Parker actually flagged that one directly, joking that Plum has been lighting up defenses all season and still landed at number 12. So this is spreading beyond one player, and the people who cover the sport for a living noticed. Annie Costabila of The Athletic said flatly that there is no way Clark is the 11th best guard in the league, that it is factually incorrect based on the statistics and where the Fever are, and she basically told the players out loud that they let personal feelings into the ballot. Christine Brennan raised the same discrepancy, and then there is the participation problem, which is almost funny. Out of roughly 180 players in the WNBA, only about 85 actually submitted a ballot for the starters, according to ESPN. That is under half the league. Some Los Angeles Sparks players said they never even received the email in time. So the ranking that supposedly represents what the players think of Caitlin Clark was produced by less than half of them, with no rule stopping anyone from simply voting for their friends. When you stack it all up, a career year ranked 11th by a fraction of the league, while the fans and the media both had her top 3, the vote stops looking like an evaluation and starts looking like a group of people sending a signal to one person. Which raises the obvious question, why her?
Funny for me, the whole Jackie Young being the 14th best guard. And yeah, like, the players absolutely voted for their friends. And let's be honest, Caitlin Clark doesn't really have that many friends. Like, you had, I can't remember who it was Chennai basically being like, oh, you know, it's a sisterhood, we all stick together. It's like, no.
That line is the hinge of this entire story, so sit with it. The host says the players voted for their friends, and then he says the quiet part, that Caitlin Clark does not really have that many friends inside this league. Now, part of what is happening is simple and human. Jackie Young got ranked 14th, which is genuinely absurd for a 2-time champion, and the most likely explanation there really is just that teammates and buddies vote for each other and the popular names float to the top. That happens in every all-star vote in every sport. But there is a difference between not getting your friends' votes and getting actively shoved down the board while your numbers climb. One is a popularity contest. The other is closer to a statement, and this is where the host stops talking about the vote and starts talking about something bigger, something that explains why it is Clark specifically, year after year, sitting at the bottom of a list her production says she should be near the top of. He builds a theory about what happens to certain players the moment they pull on a certain jersey, a theory about belonging, about who gets let into the club and who gets frozen out of it. You may not agree with all of it, but it is the most convincing explanation anyone has offered for a number that makes no basketball sense. And once you hear it, that 11 stops being a mystery.
If you join the Fever knowing you're not going to be liked by the players, and people are like, oh, social media fans are the reason people don't join the Fever. No. If you join the Indiana Fever, you give up your pass. Like, you basically give up your ability to be, you know, accepted, or for lack of a better word, like, you give up your admission slip to the club. And like, it is what it is.
So here is the theory the host lays out, and I want to be clear that this is his read on the league's culture, not a documented fact, but it is a sharp read. His argument is that the Indiana Fever have effectively become the villain franchise of the WNBA, and that the moment a player signs there, she gives up her standing with the rest of the league. He compares it to a passport. His point is that in a lot of countries, you cannot hold two at once. You take the new one, and you surrender the old one. And in his telling, joining the Fever works the same way. You trade your membership in the wider sisterhood of the league for a spot in Indiana, and you do it knowing you will not be embraced by everyone else. He even argues this is exactly why the Fever locker room is so tight and so good, that if the rest of the league is going to treat your building like enemy territory, the people inside it bond harder, because they really only have each other. And he points to a detail that actually supports him. He claims Kelsey Mitchell's highest ever finish in the player vote came in a stretch when the Fever were near the bottom of the standings and posed no threat to anyone. In other words, the players were happy to rate a Fever guard when Indiana was losing and harmless, and far less happy once that same team, with Clark at the center of it, turned into the biggest draw and the biggest threat in the sport. Whether or not you buy every piece of it, it explains something the box score cannot, and it sets up the part of this that turns from a theory into a receipt, because there is a player who lived this exact story a decade before Clark ever did.
I want to see him go. They already hate Candace Parker. Like, Angel Reese refused to celebrate Candace Parker's jersey retirement. And do you want to know what? Do you know what Angel Reese fans say to Candace Parker goes out of her way to hate Angel Reese? Do you know what Candace Parker? You know what egregious thing Candace Parker did? Said that Angel Reese is not like she.
And that is why Candace Parker riding in to defend Caitlin Clark is not a coincidence. It is the tell. Because Parker is not some universally beloved figure, the players line up behind either, and there is a very recent, very concrete example. Back in the summer of 2025, Parker did a tier-ranking segment for Complex, where she was handed a list of WNBA stars and asked to sort them, and she placed Chicago's Angel Reese in the C tier, the lowest grade she gave anyone. Reese did not take it well. Parker doubled down on it on her own podcast, and Reese fired back on social media with a post about clout being, in her words, one hell of a drug. Then came the moment the host is pointing at. When the Chicago Sky retired Parker's number 3 at Wintrust Arena that August, the whole team wore Candace Parker tribute shirts during warm-ups. Every single player except Angel Reese, who kept her jacket zipped over hers, and it was caught on video and went everywhere. Now, in fairness, at Parker's earlier jersey retirement with the Sparks in June, Reese was complimentary and even ran over to hug her, so this was clearly personal and specific, not a blanket thing. But the larger point holds. This is a 2-time MVP, a 3-time champion, a first-ballot Hall of Famer whose jersey now hangs in the rafters in 2 different cities, and current players still would not all stand and clap for her. So when Parker looks at Caitlin Clark getting voted 11th, she is not reacting as a neutral commentator. She is reacting as someone who knows exactly what it feels like to be that good and still get the cold shoulder from the room. And once you understand Parker's own history, her defense of Clark stops sounding like a hot take and starts sounding like a warning.
She doesn't give a shit. Candace Parker doesn't give a shit. Like, everyone's like, oh yeah, you know, Candace Parker was beloved by the players. No, she wasn't. They voted her the most overrated player in the league. She won MVP, and Gino Auriemma said, nah, I don't want to bring her to the Olympics. She then goes and wins DPOY in 2020, and then they said in the 2021 Olympics, nah, we don't want to bring you to the Olympics, and she goes and wins a ring. She got snubbed twice for the Olympics, and both years won a ring.
So let's walk through what Parker actually went through, because it is the whole point. This is a player who won Rookie of the Year and League MVP in the same season in 2008. She won a second MVP in 2013. She won Defensive Player of the Year in 2020. And despite all of that, she carried a reputation among some of her peers as an overrated player. That is the label the host throws out. And while I would treat any anonymous player poll reputation as exactly that, a reputation and not a court ruling, it absolutely followed her. The clearest, most documented example is the Olympics. In 2016, USA Basketball, with Gino Auriemma running the team, left Parker off the roster for the Rio Games. She was a former MVP, still in her prime, and she got cut. What did she do that summer? She went back to Los Angeles and won the WNBA championship, and she was named Finals MVP doing it. Then she got passed over for the national team again, and in 2021 she went home to Chicago and won a title with the Sky, her hometown franchise. Read that back. In the years the Sports Insiders decided she was not one of the 12 best players in the country, she went out and won rings and Finals MVPs. That is not a fluke. That is a specific kind of player, elite by every objective measure, and somehow never fully embraced by the people in charge of the in-group. If that sounds familiar, it should, because it is almost note for note what is happening to Caitlin Clark right now. The production is undeniable. The fans and the media see it, and a chunk of the establishment keeps voting like they refuse to. Parker is not guessing at Clark's experience. She has the receipts on her own.
Like, Candace Parker went to Tennessee. She did not play for Gino. In fact, she played for, oh my God, I just blanked on the name. Pat Summitt, that's her name. I got the famous tennis. I was like, famous Tennessee basketball coach. No, she played for Pat Summitt. Like, they hated UConn. Gino hated her. She got fucked by Gino. She got fucked. The UConn Mafia hated her.
And the host traces it all the way back to where it started, which is the part most people skip. Candace Parker did not come up through the sport's biggest machine. She went to Tennessee and played for the late Pat Summitt, not UConn, not for Gino Auriemma. In women's college basketball, that distinction is not small. UConn under Auriemma has been the sport's dominant program and its most powerful network for a generation, and Parker chose the rival. The host puts it bluntly, saying she was on the outside of that world and that Auriemma's circle never warmed to her. Now I want to attribute that carefully. The idea that Gino personally disliked her is the host's framing, and part of a long-reported, back-and-forth beef between the two of them, not something either one has laid out as settled fact for the record. But the shape of it is real, and it has been reported for years. And it lines up with the thesis in a way that is honestly a little uncomfortable. If the people who run the sport's inner circle tend to protect the players who came up inside it, then a star who came up outside it is always going to be a little exposed. Parker came up outside it, and Caitlin Clark, for all the noise, came out of Iowa, not out of the traditional blue blood pipeline either, and she blew up so fast and so publicly that she skipped the line entirely. Two different eras, two different players, the same underlying pattern, the outsider who gets too big, too fast, and never quite gets the insider's benefit of the doubt. Which brings us to the single clearest piece of evidence that Parker sees herself in Clark, and it is not something she said, it is something that was done to her.
Where you've got Candace Parker, and that's the thing where it's like, you're like, oh, Candace Parker come to defense of Caitlin. Because to a lesser extent, she was Caitlin. She was the player that they went after during the WNBA's equivalent of Malice in the Palace. Was it the Detroit Shock LA Sparks brawl? They went after Candace Parker. To a much lesser extent, she was Caitlin Clark when they came in. They went for her. She didn't have the backing of UConn. She was the young hotshot player.
Here it is. The reason Parker, of all people, is the one standing up for Caitlin Clark. Back in 2008, Parker's rookie year, there was a brawl between the Los Angeles Sparks and the Detroit Shock, so ugly it got labeled the WNBA's version of the Malice at the Palace. And when it went off, Parker, the hyped #1 overall pick, the new face everybody was talking about, was right in the middle of it. She was, to a smaller degree than Clark, but in the same shape, the young outsider who arrived with a spotlight on her and immediately became the player the rest of the league wanted to knock down. She did not have the establishment's protection, she had a target on her back. And then she watched, years later, a different young guard walk into the same league with the same spotlight and the same missing safety net and get physically targeted on the floor and mathematically buried in a vote at the very same time. That is why she is not staying quiet. She is not defending Clark because it is the popular thing to do or because it plays well online. She is defending Clark because she is the one person in that building who has already lived this exact movie all the way to the end, and she knows how it goes. So here is the real question, and I actually want you to answer it. When the fans say second, the media say third, and the players say 11th, which of those three groups do you trust to tell you how good Caitlin Clark really is? Drop your number in the comments and tell me why. If this finally made that vote make sense, hit the like button and subscribe so you do not miss the next one, because this story is a long way from over.